Elon Musk is touting this AI. He says, it's really, in a way, quite terrifying to see what it's doing.
In spring 2024, Grok AI was given Google's publicly available research, patents, and technical documents and asked a simple question.
We're going to show you exactly how and why, and it really is remarkable to see the advancement of artificial intelligence.
What do they reveal when analyzed together at scale? With no insider access or leaks, just public data, it identified not a single secret, but a larger pattern hidden across years of work. That pattern suggests a direction in quantum computing that raises big questions about what comes next. Do you think AI can really connect discoveries like this? Yes or no? Let us know in the comments.
It can get 100% on any test for any field, mathematics, physics, engineering, you name it.
Quantum computing fundamentals. Before getting to what Grok found, it helps to understand what quantum computing is and why the gap between where it was 5 years ago and where it appears to be heading matters so much.
Best estimates, a calculation that takes Willow under 5 minutes would take the fastest supercomputer 10 to the 25 years.
Google has been investing in quantum technology for more than a decade. The commitment is not casual. It involves purpose-built facilities, dedicated research teams, and a long-term technical roadmap that the company has executed with unusual consistency. The most visible milestone came in 2019 when Google's Sycamore processor achieved what researchers called quantum supremacy. The claim was that Sycamore completed a calculation in 200 seconds that Google estimated would take the most powerful classical supercomputer about 10,000 years.
Quantum superposition leads to richer and more interesting technology, from powering faster algorithms in quantum computers to securing communications through new cryptography and more.
The result was disputed by IBM, though the broader idea that quantum systems can outperform classical machines in specific tasks remains widely accepted. Understanding why requires understanding what makes a quantum computer different from the device you are reading this on right now. Classical computers process information in bits. A bit is either 0 or 1. Every calculation is built from combinations of zeros and ones flipping at enormous speed. This is powerful enough to run the modern internet, but it has a fundamental ceiling. Some problems are so complex that even the fastest classical computer would take longer than the age of the universe to enumerate all possible solutions. Quantum computers use qubits instead of bits. A qubit does not have to be 0 or 1. It can be both simultaneously in a state called superposition. This is a physical property of matter at the quantum scale. A qubit in superposition occupies both states until measured. The consequence is that a quantum computer does not check every possible solution one at a time. It can, in certain calculations, evaluate many possibilities simultaneously. The analogy is a maze where instead of trying one path at a time, you explore all paths at once and reach the exit having examined them together. Coherence time is the key limitation that has prevented quantum computing from becoming practical at scale. Qubits lose their quantum state through interaction with the environment, a process called decoherence. In early Google systems, coherence lasted only microseconds, that is, millionths of a second, far too short for complex computation. If recent findings in Google's public data are accurate, improvements in stability may suggest this barrier is beginning to weaken over time itself now. The rumors that changed everything. In the second half of 2023 and into early 2024, something shifted in the conversations happening at the edges of the quantum computing research community. Not in press releases, not in official announcements. In the spaces where researchers talk to each other, in conference hallways, in the footnotes of preprint papers, in the careful language of patent applications filed without fanfare. The subject of those conversations was error correction. To understand why error correction is the central problem in quantum computing, you need to understand how fragile a qubit actually is. The quantum state that makes a qubit useful is disrupted by almost anything: temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic interference, vibrations in the physical structure of the machine. Even the act of observing a qubit, of measuring whether it is a 0 or a 1, collapses its superposition. This fragility means that quantum computations accumulate errors constantly. The longer the calculation runs, the more errors pile up, and at some point the output of the calculation becomes unreliable. The standard response to this problem has been to use many physical qubits to represent a single logical qubit, with the redundancy allowing errors to be detected and corrected. The ratio required has historically been the central obstacle. Depending on the error rate of the physical qubits, you might need anywhere from hundreds to thousands of physical qubits to produce one reliable logical qubit. A computation that requires 1,000 reliable logical qubits might therefore require millions of physical qubits, a scale that current hardware cannot approach. The rumors circulating in late 2023 were not about incremental improvements to this ratio. They were about a different approach entirely. Patent filings were appearing that referenced surface codes with adaptive feedback mechanisms, technical language describing quantum systems that could monitor and correct their own errors in real time rather than accumulating errors and fixing them after the fact. The distinction matters enormously. A system that catches errors as they form prevents them from compounding. A system that catches them after the fact is always fighting against accumulation. What the rumor community was describing, pieced together from patent language and indirect signals, was not a better version of the existing approach. It was a categorical shift in how error correction was being handled, the kind of shift that does not improve the situation by a percentage, but changes the nature of the problem itself. The gap between incremental improvement and categorical shift is the gap between a faster horse and an engine, and the signals coming out of Google's patent record in late 2023 were pointing toward an engine. What Grok analyzed and found. In March 2024, Grok was given a research task that a human analyst would struggle to complete in months. It cross-referenced hundreds of Google patents, research papers, technical documents, and infrastructure announcements simultaneously, looking for patterns invisible at human scale. The goal was not to find a single smoking gun document that announced a breakthrough. It was to identify the shape of what was happening across the entire body of publicly available material. Individual documents rarely announce paradigm shifts directly. What they do, when read together and at scale, is reveal direction and density of effort, resources committed, technical approaches being developed, and convergence points where multiple research threads head toward same destination. What Grok found was not a single breakthrough. It was an ecosystem of converging breakthroughs, 3 distinct evidence clusters that, read separately, could each be explained as routine research activity, but read together pointed towards something significantly larger. The first cluster was in patent filings. Google had been filing patents related to topological quantum computing, a specific technical approach that uses what are called topological qubits. Topological qubits are fundamentally different from superconducting qubits in Google's Sycamore processor. They exist at the boundary between 2 quantum states in a way that makes them theoretically resistant to environmental disruptions that cause decoherence. The physical reason for this resistance is built into the topology of the system itself, meaning the protection comes from the fundamental geometry of the quantum state rather than from external shielding or correction mechanisms applied after the fact. They are harder to build than conventional qubits, significantly harder, but the theoretical stability they offer in return is not a marginal improvement. It is an exponential one. The second cluster was in infrastructure. Google had been building specialized cooling facilities in multiple locations. The technical specifications of these facilities, available in construction permits, equipment procurement records, and technical documentation filed with regulatory bodies pointed to temperatures approaching absolute zero, lower than the temperatures previously documented for Google's own quantum systems. Quantum computers require extreme cold because heat is a primary source of the environmental disruption that causes decoherence. The colder the environment, the more stable the quantum state. The facilities Google was building were not designed for the systems Google had already announced. They were designed for systems that required substantially more stability than anything Google had publicly described. The third cluster was targeted hiring convergence. The proposed hybrid quantum processor.
The thing that makes DeepMind unique is that DeepMind is absolutely focused on creating digital superintelligence, an AI that is vastly smarter than any human on Earth and ultimately smarter than all humans on Earth combined.
Based on the convergence it found across the three evidence clusters, Grok assembled a technical picture of what Google appeared to be building. The picture describes a hybrid quantum processor that brings together three elements, none of which is new in isolation, but whose combination represents something that has not been achieved before. The first element is a topological error-resistant architecture built on a class of particles called Majorana fermions. Majorana fermions are real but exotic. They exist at the boundary of certain special materials under specific conditions, and their quantum properties make them inherently stable in ways that conventional quantum particles are not. A qubit built from Majorana fermions does not need external correction mechanisms to stay coherent because the stability is encoded in the physics of the particle itself. The analogy that comes closest is the difference between a spinning top that needs constant attention to stay upright and a gyroscope that maintains its orientation through its own internal dynamics. The gyroscope does not require external intervention. Its stability is a property of what it is, not something imposed on it from outside. The second element is adaptive real-time error correction. The standard approach to quantum error correction works by allowing errors to accumulate over the course of a calculation and then applying correction routines to clean up the accumulated damage. This works up to a point, but it requires significant computational overhead and it always operates after the fact. The adaptive approach Grok identified in Google's patent filings works differently. Instead of accumulating errors and correcting them in batches, the system continuously monitors its own quantum states and makes micro-adjustments as errors begin to form, before they can compound into larger problems. The difference in outcomes is significant. An error that is caught as it forms does not cascade. An error that accumulates alongside other errors requires increasingly complex correction as the cascade grows. The third element is the coherence time that results from combining the first two with the ultra-cold environments Google's facilities were built to maintain. This is where the numbers become genuinely difficult to absorb without stopping to sit with them. Google's previous quantum systems measured coherence in microseconds, millionths of a second. The theoretical result of combining topological qubits with adaptive real-time correction in a sufficiently cold environment is coherence measured in seconds, not milliseconds, seconds. The improvement from microseconds to seconds is a factor of 1 million. A qubit that stays coherent for 1 million times longer than its predecessor is not a better qubit in the same way that a faster car is a better car. It is a different category of object doing a different category of work. Reports from people described only as anonymous researchers involved in early testing suggested that prototype results in late 2023 exceeded even the theoretical predictions. Coherence times came in longer than the models had predicted. Error rates dropped to levels that had previously been described as impossible rather than merely difficult. The system scaled, moving from dozens to hundreds of qubits while maintaining the stability improvements rather than seeing them degrade as the system grew. One researcher described it as watching a door open to a room we did not know existed. The three elements of the proposed architecture are individually known to quantum researchers, What Grok found was that Google appeared to be combining all three simultaneously, and that the combination produces results that none of the three achieves alone. Why this matters? The gap between a quantum computer that works in controlled laboratory conditions for milliseconds and a quantum computer that maintains coherence for seconds while correcting its own errors in real time is not just a technical gap. It is the gap between a technology that exists as a research object and a technology that can be applied to the problems that actually shape human life. The most immediate application area is pharmaceutical development. Developing a new drug currently takes an average of more than a decade from initial research to clinical availability. And that timeline is driven largely by the complexity of modeling how molecules interact with each other and with biological systems. Classical computers cannot simulate these interactions at full quantum mechanical accuracy. The models they produce are approximations, and the approximations are good enough to narrow the search for effective compounds, but not good enough to eliminate the need for the extensive physical testing that consumes most of the development timeline. A quantum computer running at the scale Grok's analysis suggests Google is approaching could simulate molecular interactions with full accuracy, not in years, in hours. The implications for cancer treatment, for Alzheimer's research, for the speed at which new therapies for emerging diseases can be developed are not incremental. They are a change in the fundamental speed limit of the process. Materials science faces a similar constraint. The properties of materials at the atomic scale are governed by quantum mechanics, which means that classical computers are always approximating when they try to model them. A quantum computer simulates quantum systems naturally because it operates by the same physical rules. The materials that become possible to discover and design when you can model atomic interactions with full accuracy include stronger structural alloys, better semiconductor materials, and possibly room-temperature superconductors. A room-temperature superconductor, a material that conducts electricity with no resistance at normal temperatures, would transform energy transmission, computing efficiency, and transportation in ways that are difficult to fully anticipate from the present position. Artificial intelligence development is the application area where the feedback loop between quantum computing and the technology that found the evidence Grok analyzed becomes most visible. Training large AI models is fundamentally an optimization problem. The model is adjusted across billions of parameters in search of the configuration that minimizes error on the training data. Classical computers do this through gradient descent, an iterative process that works well but scales with the size of the problem in ways that create enormous computational costs. Quantum computers can solve certain categories of optimization problems exponentially faster than classical systems. The AI models that become trainable when optimization problems that currently require months of supercomputer time can be solved in hours are not better versions of what exists today. They are a different class of system entirely. The broader point Grok's analysis draws out is that quantum computing is not one technology among many advancing in parallel. It is a capability that accelerates the other capabilities. A quantum breakthrough does not advance quantum computing. It accelerates everything that computation touches, which in the current era is nearly everything. The practical weight of a quantum coherence breakthrough is not contained within the field of quantum computing. It redistributes across every scientific and technological domain where computation is currently the limiting factor. The security dimension. The applications discussed so far are the ones that generate enthusiasm. The security dimension of a quantum computing breakthrough generates something closer to alarm among the people who work on it professionally, and it deserves direct engagement rather than being placed in a footnote. Modern encryption works because certain mathematical problems are easy to verify but extremely hard to solve. The most widely used encryption systems depend on the difficulty of factoring very large numbers into their prime components. A classical computer factoring a sufficiently large number would require more time than the current age of the universe. This is not a temporary limitation waiting for faster classical hardware. It is a structural feature of the mathematics, which is why the encryption has held and why the Internet's security infrastructure was built on top of it. A sufficiently powerful quantum computer breaks this. The algorithm for factoring large numbers on a quantum computer, developed by mathematician Peter Shor in 1994, runs in polynomial time rather than exponential time. For a quantum computer with enough stable qubits, factoring the numbers that protect current encryption becomes a task measured in hours rather than geological epochs. Every encrypted communication, every secure financial transaction, every protected database that currently relies on factoring-based encryption becomes vulnerable. This is not a theoretical concern held only by researchers. The National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States has been running a formal process to develop post-quantum cryptography standards since 2016, specifically in anticipation of the day when quantum computers capable of breaking current encryption become available. The process has produced candidate algorithms and is moving towards standardization. The fact that this work has been underway for nearly a decade is itself a signal about how seriously the technical and security communities have taken the timeline. Grok flagged two specific signals in Google's public record that move the security dimension from background concern to foreground consideration. The first was increasing collaboration between Google's quantum research divisions and government national security agencies, visible in research partnerships, joint publications, and infrastructure projects with government involvement. The second was a series of applications by Google for specialized security clearances for certain research divisions. Security clearances for a commercial technology company's research staff are unusual. They signal that some portion of what is being developed is considered sensitive enough to warrant the kind of access controls normally associated with government and military research. The strategic implication Grok identified is the asymmetry concern. The organization or government that achieves functional quantum supremacy in cryptography-relevant computation first gains a window in which it can read encrypted communications that others believe are secure while protecting its own communications with post-quantum encryption that the other party cannot yet break. The window may not last forever. Post-quantum encryption will eventually be universally deployed. But the window exists, and during the window, the asymmetry of knowledge and capability is substantial in ways that have no peacetime analog in recent technological history. The security dimension of a quantum breakthrough is not a side effect to be managed. It is a central feature of the technology's strategic significance, and the signals Grok found in Google's public record suggest that significance is already being recognized at the level of government engagement. The counter-narrative. The picture painted by the security signals, a powerful technology being developed in increasing proximity to national security apparatus, with clearances being sought and government partnerships being formed, sits in direct tension with another equally real aspect of Google's quantum computing record. And Grok's analysis noted both, rather than choosing between them. Google has made substantial and genuine contributions to open quantum computing research. The CIRC framework, a free and open-source quantum computing toolkit that Google released and has continued to develop, is used by researchers at universities and institutions around the world who have no connection to Google's proprietary work. Google has published hundreds of peer-reviewed papers on quantum computing topics, making technical findings available to the global research community rather than keeping them internal. It has collaborated with academic institutions across multiple countries on foundational research questions. It has provided cloud-based access to its quantum processors, allowing external researchers to run experiments on hardware they would otherwise have no way to access. Both of these things are true simultaneously. Google shares foundational knowledge broadly while developing proprietary capabilities that appear to be moving toward restriction. This pattern is not unique to Google or to quantum computing. It is the standard operating mode of technology organizations that sit at the frontier of commercially and strategically significant research. The open contributions are real, and they advance the field genuinely. The proprietary development is also real, and it advances the organization's competitive and strategic position specifically. The question Grok identified as the one that the available evidence cannot answer is where the line falls between what gets shared and what gets protected, and how that line will move as the technology matures. The current balance, substantial open sharing of foundational work, alongside protected development of the most advanced applications, may not hold as the capability approaches the threshold where its strategic implications become concrete rather than theoretical. There is no answer available in the public record to the question of where Google draws that line internally, or how it thinks about the obligations that come with being the potential first mover in a technology with these implications. What the public record shows is that both the openness and the secrecy are real, that they coexist, and that the balance between them is a question the public does not currently have the information to evaluate. The open and the proprietary aspects of Google's quantum work are both genuine and both significant, and the tension between them is not a contradiction to be resolved, but a condition to be watched carefully as the technology develops. The limits of what we know. Grok's analysis of Google's public record is a demonstration of what pattern recognition across large bodies of information can produce. It is not a demonstration of certainty. The distinction matters, and Grok maintained it throughout the analysis rather than collapsing confident-sounding conclusions out of ambiguous evidence. The world produces data at a scale that continuously outruns human capacity to read it. Patent databases grow by thousands of filings every week. Research preprint servers publish hundreds of papers every day. Infrastructure procurement records, hiring announcements, regulatory filings, conference proceedings, and technical documentation accumulate in public repositories that are in principle accessible to anyone, and in practice too large for any individual researcher to monitor comprehensively. The most important signals in this data are often not in any single document. They are in the relationship between documents, the convergence of independent threads that reveals a direction of travel that no single source announces directly. What Grok does well is read these relationships at scale. The three evidence clusters it identified in Google's public record, the topological qubit patents, the ultra-cold facility specifications, and the targeted hiring and error correction, would individually support multiple interpretations. Read together, they support a narrower range of interpretations. The convergence is the signal. What can be said with reasonable confidence from the analysis is that quantum computing is advancing faster than public announcements suggest, that theoretical barriers that were considered stable a decade ago are falling, and that a genuine breakthrough in error correction would represent a categorical change in what quantum computers can do rather than an incremental improvement in existing capabilities. What cannot be said with certainty from the same analysis is whether Google has already achieved the specific hybrid architecture Grok's pattern recognition pointed toward, when any such achievement would be publicly announced, or what the full downstream implications would be. The gap between what the pattern suggests and what can be confirmed is real, and any honest account of the analysis has to hold that gap open rather than closing it prematurely with confidence the evidence does not support. The value of Grok's analysis is not that it provides certainty. It is that it narrows the space of what is plausible and identifies signals that deserve sustained attention even before they become confirmable facts. The human dimension. The response to major technological shifts follows a pattern that history has documented often enough to constitute something close to a law. Every significant technology is greeted with a mixture of genuine excitement and genuine fear, and the fear is always partly right and partly wrong. The printing press arrived in the 15th century, carrying concerns that the wider distribution of text would undermine the authority structures that held society together and produce chaos through uncontrolled proliferation of ideas. The concern was not unfounded. The printing press did disrupt authority structures. It also made literacy widespread, enabled the scientific revolution, and produced the information environment that modern civilization depends on. Both things happened. Electricity arrived carrying fears that it would drive people mad, that the unnatural power running through wires and lights would disturb something fundamental about human experience. The fear was wrong in its specifics and right in its intuition that electricity would change everything. It did change everything. It also extended the productive hours of human life, enabled modern medicine, and made the technology that reads these words possible. The internet arrived carrying fears that it would destroy community, isolate people from each other, and collapse the social fabric. Some of those fears had more substance than the electric madness concerns. The internet has changed community in ways that include genuine damage. It has also connected people across distances and contexts that physical proximity could never have bridged. And it has made the sum of human knowledge accessible in seconds to anyone with a connection. AI arrives now carrying fears about job displacement, about autonomous systems making consequential decisions without human oversight, about the concentration of capability in the hands of a small number of organizations. These fears are not unfounded. The same pattern holds, partly right, partly wrong, and the full picture only visible in hindsight. Quantum computing will follow the same arc. The promise is genuine. Accelerated drug development, new materials, more efficient energy systems, AI capabilities that address problems currently beyond reach. The peril is equally genuine. Broken encryption, strategic asymmetries between nations and organizations at different points in quantum capability. The concentration of an unprecedented problem-solving advantage in whoever reaches the threshold first. The governance questions this raises do not have easy answers, and they are not being asked loudly enough in public discourse given how close the technology may actually be. How do you ensure that the benefits of quantum computing are distributed broadly rather than concentrated in the organizations and governments that develop it first? How do you build international frameworks for managing a technology whose security implications create powerful incentives for secrecy? How do you develop post-quantum encryption at a pace that stays ahead of the quantum decryption capability being developed in parallel? These are not questions that will be answered after the technology arrives. They need to be answered before it does, or at least alongside its development rather than trailing behind it. The window for shaping how quantum computing enters the world is open now. It will not stay open indefinitely. The history of major technologies says that the fears and the promises are both real, and that the outcome is shaped more by the governance decisions made during development than by the technology itself. Grok found no secret, only public signals in patents, hiring, facilities, and research. Together, they suggest a direction in Google quantum efforts toward stability, error correction, and longer coherence. The implications span computing and security. The real edge is interpretation, not access. If this analysis helped, like, share, and subscribe now.